Welcome to the show, Brain Health, Unchaining Your Pain. And I am really excited to welcome onto the show Rebecca Reed. Welcome.
Hello, Ruth. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
So for those that don't know Rebecca, she's founder of Siendo, which is a mental health and wellbeing trainer. She's a speaker and advocate for mental health. She launched Siendo to give people the knowledge, tools and confidence they need to support their own well-being at every stage of their lives. And Rebecca delivers mental health first aid and suicide first aid training, workplace mindfulness training, and she offers a wide range of wellbeing talks to organisations of all sizes. And I know we connected because you helped deliver one of the mental health first aid courses that I went to. So thank you so much. I'm so excited to talk about the topic we're going to talk about today. So before we start, I'd love to know what you're passionate about in life right now.
Oh, it's actually really nicely linked because obviously, I'm on here to talk about maternal mental health and everything related. And I have a 6-month-old little boy, very passionate about becoming a mummy and navigating that in the world of having my own business, in the world of, bringing that into everything I do as in my role. So my passion now is helping parents to navigate their mental health, but also really work with mums and see how we can support our well-being better as well.
Yeah, do you know, I love that because I don't think we give enough credence to mums or parents generally as to the impact that having children has on your mental health and well-being, and nothing can honestly prepare you for having a child. So I think a lot more support is needed in that space because we all seem to be firefighting, don't we, often? Certainly in the first well, you're 6 months in, but first year it was for me, or 2 years, it's a survival rather than anything else. So
I think it doesn't get out. It doesn't get easier. It just changes, doesn't it? So each time you kind of hit with a different challenge, and you just have to work your way through that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for me personally, I have a 3.5-year-old now, every day, certainly in the last year, I wake up with a new child. And you never, because they develop so fast, you never really know what person's going to greet you in the morning.
It's a nice person.
So before we dive into your story and your journeys to where you are today, I'd love to know for you, what does optimal brain health mean for you personally in the context of your life's journey? Okay.
Optimal brain health. Okay, so there's so much included in mental health and brain health in general. I don't think I'll pull on the fact that how interconnected physical and mental health are, because that's so a lot of us understand that now. One thing that pops into my head when you say it is all around your own self-worth. I'm a big believer of having this real strong foundation of self-worth, which that whatever happens in life, you will find a way through. And when you have that really, really strong foundation, you can build upon it. So you can build, better practices that support your well-being, and both physical and mental. You can communicate more clearly around people. You can be confident around how you're feeling and your emotions and communicating them. All this stuff really does build upon a really strong sense of self-worth and self-esteem and everything. Mm-hmm. That's what pulls me when you say that.
Yeah. Do you know, I think that's such an important one because we often don't think about self-worth in the context of the relationship we have with ourselves, and it's kind of fundamental to the relationship we have with us, because it's the longest relationship we'll ever have, is the one we have with ourselves. And if we don't take the time to look at how much we value ourselves in the context of self-worth, and what stories we're telling ourselves, we're really not going to be having that great relationship with us. And I know it's so, I know we're going to talk about parenthood, but in the context of being a new mum, it's so easy, isn't it, to diminish your self-worth and think that you're not good enough.
Yeah.
because you're so new to the job, and nobody gives you a job specification, and nobody gives you job training.
Yeah. and the difficulty is that you're surrounded, especially like you go to baby groups, you do all stuff, you're surrounded by so many other new mums with so many babies that are so different, and the amount of comparison that then comes in, and if you maybe your child is not doing the same things as another child, you start reflecting on your own self as a parent. And so like if you haven't got that kind of level of self-worth that I am doing a good job, I'm doing the best I can at the moment, and that the comparison side of things can really eat you alive.
Absolutely. And do you know what I really found fascinating, just in the context of my journey, was how much we don't educate parents in how to become a parent.
Yeah.
And so even when I picked up books around becoming a parent, and I can't remember the name of the book, but it's a classic one, but there wasn't much mentioned in about nurturing your child through pregnancy, which I find fascinating, and also nurturing yourself in terms of that self-care. It's very much kind of methodical,
practical steps.
How your baby develops, and less about the self-care, and how we can care for our children as well as we're growing them. So I'd love to dive into this conversation with you. So could you just take us on your journeys to where you've been, and what led you to where we are today, and to becoming a mental health advocate?
Oh gosh, so I've worked in mental health for quite a while now, and I originally came into this world. Well, I had a lot of a difficult childhood, but I spent quite a few years basically trying to repair a lot of stuff that was there for me, and that got me. I fell in love through like it was therapy and coaching. Like I'm a massive fan of those, and started doing that myself. And then I started wanting to share it with other people, and so I trained as a coach, and I was training people in both the work setting and personally through stress and burnout and everything related. And I then got into the kind of more into the niche world of mental health, because a lot of people that were coming to me with mental health, or for coaching, were coming to me with mental health stuff. And so you can't separate the two. You can't just look at how someone can go towards their goals. It's so interrelated with their well-being and their mental health. And so I felt so out of my depth. And so I was like, I don't know how to deal with all this. And even though I've grown up, not personal experience around it with family, with myself, I still didn't really understand how to deal with it properly in the professional setting. Yeah. And so I then I started moonlighting as a mental health support worker. So I'd be working in the bank Monday to Friday, and then working as a support worker on the weekends, which was very, very intense. And that was what made me shift into the work I do now, because time and time again, I was working on the wards, I was looking at people's files when supporting them, and so many points along the way, I was noticing that the ball had been dropped in some way. So they hadn't had the right amount of support from, whether it was, NHS, whether it was family, whether it was friends, whether it was school, whatever it was. There were so many points along their way in their journey that something could have been done. And it, for whatever reason, it wasn't. And so that made me want to really go from the proactive side, because I'm not the kind of person that sits back and goes, right, okay, let's just maintain life as it is. I'm the kind of person that wants to look at how we can boost it, how we can solve things, how we can help things to improve. And so that kind of really drew my attention then to mental health first aid, which is where I then started training as an instructor to give people skills. I did mindfulness and meditation training, because I'm a big fan of that. That's amazing for your well-being. And I started training all these different areas until I finally leaped out of the corporate world and into my own business. And we came across each other, obviously doing training here, and then obviously you reached out to me on LinkedIn then, because you saw my first ever personal post on LinkedIn, where it was breastfeeding week. It was. And I, as a new mum, I was really frustrated by seeing how many posts there were about breast is best. You can do it, just hold on. And that kind of really frustrated me at that point. So I did a little post about how the fact that, you know, is so much more to that, and started talking very briefly about my experience of breastfeeding and my experience of post-weaning depression, which a lot of people don't know about in general as a term. And then that's how we came to meet each other, didn't we?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I think it's so important that we bring this topic to the fore, because it's something that's not really discussed very often.
Yeah.
And it's so hard for some mums, isn't it? That, you know, that initial desire to go into, you know, you have your new baby, and to be able to do what you had set your mind to do. It's the same as, you know, when you have your birthing plan. And you put together this birthing plan, and you have this fantasy, in essence what it is, about how you want your birthing experience to go.
Yeah.
And what you want to happen when. And the reality is so very different.
Yeah.
And you're not really prepared necessarily for that reality, nor the reality post giving birth. And the emotional roller coaster that you go on, as a consequence of obviously your hormonal shift that happens when you give birth, and the crash that can happen quite heavily for some people, as they plummet back down to not being pregnant again. So before we dive into that, I really want to acknowledge this. What you've just mentioned earlier is the fact that you can't separate coaching and people's past trauma, because you have to look at the person. And I certainly found that for myself, is that when you're focusing on coaching, which tends to be forward looking, if somebody has got problems with their past, and often it can be go back to their childhood, which you kindly mentioned from yourself, and I've childhood trauma as well, is that you can't run forward in life if you're bungee cord, you know, you have a bungee cord wrapped around you that ties you back to your past, because it doesn't matter how hard you run or how fast you run, you'll constantly be pulled back and held back by those past experiences. So I think, and it's particularly from a coaching perspective, I don't know if you found this, and is that it's very easy, if you're not equipped as a coach, to open up what I think I'm going to call it the mental health Pandora's box, where you touch on a nerve, or you touch on a past trauma that maybe somebody hasn't been able to articulate or talk about, and it can send, and it, you know, result in an emotional outburst that you as a coach don't have the tools or techniques to deal with. And so it's so important that I think when you're coaching is to be aware of that, and also as a client is to find the right coach for you, or the right support network for you, that is going to look at all of you and make sure that you don't A, nothing falls between the cracks, and B, that you don't end up being overwhelmed, or having a release that you weren't expecting to have, and you don't have the facility to calm it down. Is that your experience from people?
Yeah, massively. Like, I think there are many coaches without mental health experience, which is, you know, it's okay. You don't have to be a mental health professional to be a coach, but it's being, at least, you know, even if you can't deal with it yourself and something arises for one of your coachees, being able to go, oh, recognize it. This has come up. This is maybe out of my realm of skills, but I can, you know, like, discuss it with them, see what support is available, and then signpost them on to get the right support. Maybe they need to deal with it. So I think it's, rather than like you said, opening this Pandora's box, not knowing what to do with it, and then trying to shut it, and not actually not being able to do that successfully. So yeah, I agree. And I've coached for quite a few years now, and I've never come across a session where mental health distress or even just natural range of human emotion isn't triggered during sessions, and you have to be able to navigate that for their safety as well as your own.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd love to know for you, when your Pandora's box was opened in the context of your experience from pregnancy and becoming a mum, because you mentioned post-weaning depression. So I'd love to know how, if you're willing to share your story of your pregnancy journey and how it evolved for you personally.
Yes. Okay. So this, as a little prefix, this is the first time I've spoken openly and publicly about it. So if I struggle to find my descriptive words, that's why. But so my journey. So I got pregnant quite quickly, and I was running my own business. Didn't really. I wasn't prepared for the amount of impact just the pregnancy journey would have on me. So for the first 3 months, which is obviously the period that you can't tell you generally advise not to say anything to anyone about. When I was pregnant, I was horrendously sick and feeling awful, and in between I'd be running my mental health first aid courses and workshops online. In between them I was like napping on the couch, and I remember like one time I had, in between sessions, there was a whole day session, and I had this awful fatigue from the pregnancy, and in between this, I think it was like that 2-hour gap between the two sessions. I went for a nap in between, completely passed out. My husband, luckily working from home, came up and was like, Becca, you've got a session. And I literally had to run downstairs 2 minutes before the session and then go, hello, welcome back, everybody. And you're not prepared for the impact, and life can't stop. When you're going through a period of your life where you need life to stop a little bit. And it's obviously different for everyone. Some people kind of steam through the first 3 months, but for me personally, it was really, really exhausting, and I felt very ill. Then the second trimester was quite nice. Go back to the first. One of the things I really struggled with, not being a person who's always craved children. I've always been such a career-focused woman, and a couple of my friends said to me that they were quite surprised that I was even having children, because they were like, I've always just thought, my business was always my baby. So that was a huge adjustment for me, moving from actually my business being my priority to myself and my baby, my growing baby being my priority. And I remember I've got a business coach, and I remember, which is awful I hate saying out loud, but I remember saying to him, I really am starting to dislike this thing because it was making me feel so bad, and it was really getting in the way of everything I'd identified with before. I thought I was. And so it took me a couple of months to really actually grow to like what was happening to me as well. And then I moved.
It sounds like acceptance, because obviously you became pregnant really quickly, which can happen for so many women, can't it? To take you completely by surprise. And when you're not expecting anything to happen, there is this kind of period, which could be the whole pregnancy or part of it, of accepting that you are pregnant and you are going to become a mum. And the mental acceptance of it is very different to your physical acceptance, because your body just goes with what it's supposed to do. But mentally it can be really challenging, can't it?
Oh yeah, massively. Especially like if you're an active person, you do lots of different things, and suddenly you have to be careful about what you're eating, what you're doing. Like I had my hen weekend while I was pregnant as well, and it was all set up for me to do paddle boarding and all this active stuff. And then suddenly I couldn't do it, and everything you have to make such a big adjustment so quickly, and your identity completely has to shift. From the minute you get pregnant, you start shifting, and it's really, really difficult. And then there's I had prepared in my head when forecasting for my business, I had prepared for my last 3 months of pregnancy to be quite slow. So I thought, right, okay, this is where I'm going to take in freelance trainers so they can help run the training for me. I was imagining that I wasn't be able to do very much. I didn't plan for the first 3 months to be like that, so it was like another double whammy. And but then second trimester, luckily, and I've heard quite a few women say it, I was in my flow by that point. You know,
your body got used to being pregnant.
Exactly, as much
hormonal surge had come to a sort of slow surge. So.
Yeah, exactly. And so I was like, I was feeling a bit better. I was feeling more motivated, more driven. Like even though sickness was still like hovering, it was manageable. And so I was starting to like really like my growing body, and everything started shifting at that point. And then obviously my third trimester, it was more kind of around, oh God, I'm going to have to give birth to a baby, and the impact on my business. So I'm like, right, okay, preparing to step away from my business. When am I going to step away? Obviously, self-employed, you don't have the joy of maternity leave. And so it was making sure that I was still keeping my communication with my clients, like navigating how I was going to continue to earn money, like all this stuff. So it was a lot of organization and planning in the last trimester, which luckily I love to plan. So that was quite fun.
But it's really stressful though, you know, in the context of running your own business, which I obviously do as well. It's hugely stressful knowing what's going to, because you don't, it's completely unknown, isn't it? You don't know what you don't know. And so it's very hard to plan exactly what's going to happen in the future. And I know for me, certainly, I was kind of blissfully thinking that life could just go on. And I would manage the baby around life, rather than around the baby, which is not.
But you don't know that. People try and warn you, don't they? But you can't possibly understand what they say when they say your life will completely change and shift, and you can't grasp what they mean until you go through it.
Yeah, no, you can't. And it doesn't matter what anybody tells you. You just have to experience it. It's like telling you need to swim, and then somebody throwing you in the deep water, and then you have to learn for yourself
very quickly. Yeah.
So I'd love to go into your last trimester, because I'd like to share my experience too, but I'd love to hear yours, because they're so different for everybody. But it's so hard. I found it so hard. So how did it transpire for you in the last trimester?
In terms of how
your pregnancy and everything running up to the birthing experience?
Oh gosh, so well, I made a monster of a baby. So he was so big, they actually tested me for gestational diabetes, because they thought it was that, but it wasn't. He was a big boy. But I am really tall. I am quite broad. My husband is tall and broad, so we were always going to create a giant. And so I was very large, and it was, it was painful and achy and stuff. The pregnancy, like the birth itself, it happened. Well, to be fair, it wasn't the worst trimester. Everyone says your third tends to be the worst, and I still think my first was the worst. I didn't mind it so much. I just went for a few walks, things like that, trying to keep quite low. I had a massage every 2 weeks.
Did you? That's a brilliant idea. Didn't do that.
Yeah, I do think I have my baby is one of the most calmest babies I've ever known, and I do think, because I meditated throughout several times a day, I had a massage every 2 weeks, one to keep my immune system going, but also to help with the aches and pains and everything else. I do think, though, because of the way I treated myself and my body and the self-care stuff I do think it had a bit of an impact on his, I don't know, his just the way he is now as a child as well.
It absolutely does. And I don't think we pay enough attention to how we care for ourselves affects how our baby, comes into the world. Because all of our hormones, all of the cortisol, all of any hormones that we generate throughout or neurotransmitters that we generate throughout our pregnancy will all get passed on to the baby, because they respond to your stressors or lack of stressors. And so the more calm you can be, and the more you can balance your immune system, the more you can balance your nutrition and optimize your nutrition really for you, the better it will be for your baby. And I know recent studies is that before a baby is born, they've looked at toxins that go through the umbilical cord. There's over 240 toxins a baby is born with, because as a mum, which I didn't know, we detoxify ourselves through our babies, and so any toxins that you gather over your life period, you will pass on to your baby through the umbilical cord. So, and all of the food type groups, all the food groups that you choose to consume will ultimately influence your baby's choice of food groups. So, and I had no idea about this when I was, when I first became pregnant. But it's really important that you give your baby the best chance at the beginning. You want to give yourself the best diet and the best environment, in terms of stress levels and everything before the baby is born, to give them that ultimate opportunity in life. So, and I don't think, obviously from the meditation, naturally you would be activating your parasympathetic nervous system, which is your calming system in your body and mind, and that would naturally be calming your child. But conversely, super stressed parents will be activating the sympathetic nervous system, which is the fight or flight. So your baby's much more likely when they're born to be stressed and tense and and have an overactive brain in the areas of the brain that are associated with fight or flight, because they've been given the neurotransmitters that make their brain go into that state. So it's really important that we consider that. So thank you for sharing that. And I know for me personally, during I was very focused on nutrition and supplementation and getting the right supplements. And I was very lucky with my pregnancy up until the 12 days late period. when my daughter decided she didn't actually want to make an appearance. So how did it transpire for you, from a birthing experience as well?
Oh gosh, I won't go into too much detail, so just in case. But yes, luckily, thankfully, he was only a day overdue. And I had a couple of friends who were 12 days, 14 days. It was quite a long day, and it is huge, isn't it? Because it really does eat away at you.
You just want the baby out.
You just want it done, don't you? But no, he was only a day overdue. He was due on a Saturday. Came Sunday. Well, my waters broke Sunday morning at 7 a.m. So quite close to time. But probably the most traumatic part about that was the fact that at 7 o'clock, my waters broke at 7. It had meconium in the waters, so obviously a little poo in the womb, and so it becomes all my birthing plan at that point out the window. Go into hospital rather than have a nice water birth, and yeah. So, but I started at 7 o'clock. By 7:20, my contractions were already 2 to 3 minutes apart. Wow. And that's when you go into active labour, isn't it? And so I went so quickly into active labour. At that point I started vomiting everywhere. Wow. My whole body started shaking. I was going from contraction, vomit, shake, going down. My poor husband in the car, I was there with this bucket. he's driving 40 minutes to the hospital while I'm just going wild in the passenger seat. But good. He managed it very well. But I got into the hospital and it happened very quickly. I think I spent 2 hours in this holding room while they sorted out a birthing centre for me, and I was like, please give me pain medicines, I need it. But in those 2 hours I went to 8 centimeters dilated, and they didn't.
Wow.
I moved really, really fast. But then I ended up spending I think 4 hours then at 8 centimeters, because there was a bubble of water that was stopping it. Okay. So if it had have been, I think by that point we were so tired, me and the baby, and they had to help me get him out with forceps. So it ended up being quite stressful in the end. But if that bubble hadn't been there, I think I probably would have had him in 2.5 hours. it was intense very, very quickly. But it was, to be fair, like my husband was incredible. Like I was very lucky to have him there like the whole time. He was, he really, really stepped up, which was amazing. I interestingly say when women go through labour, they go multiple different ways, and they say some women go super internal and they just go very, very quiet, and I just went completely in on myself. Like I just stood there with the gas in the air. I couldn't speak, I couldn't like do anything. I just had to like work through it, and it was it was ridiculous. But it's funny because most people say that, oh, I can't remember the pain anymore, like it's a bit of a fog. I can remember it in very much detail, like the detail is very much there. Like it hasn't faded at all. But yeah, I think the whole process made me a lot more I suppose resilient, in the sense of I know how much I can handle now. The fact I made it through that situation. I remember going for a run after about like 8 weeks or something, and I hadn't run in ages. And normally when I got to that exhaustion point, I would stop. But I literally said to myself, "You've given birth, you could do this," and I used that as my motivation to keep running. And it really did, because it opened my mind to the fact that if I can do that, I can do anything. Like, I think that's the most ridiculously hard thing that anyone, like one of the things that anyone can go through.
Yeah, and I had an incredibly different birthing experience, because I never went into labour. I didn't even dilate beyond 3 centimetres, and that was induced. So I had pessaries to try and induce the labour, and that was over 2 days, and then I was induced intravenously for pretty much 12 hours before they decided they had to forcibly break my waters, which was horrifically painful. And I had to get a doctor to do it because the midwife couldn't do it. And then I ended up with a C-section because she wasn't coming out. And you know, everybody has this huge span of experiences in between, don't they? From super simple and easy to horrendously complicated. But I think, you know, that, and I totally agree with you, is it you realise how resilient you are when you go through that experience and what you can handle. And I think that was one defining moment for me too, is you know, knowing I've got this, and you know how far you can push yourself and where your limits are, and they're far beyond what we ever maybe thought we were capable of. So
God, yeah, and you hear it, don't you? Thank you for sharing that. You can hear it, don't you, where people say, during birth, I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do this. And I remember literally beforehand going, I can do this, and then as soon as it kicked in, I was like, I can't do this, I can't do this. And they were like, yes, you can. And I was like, yeah. And I remember my mum saying to me, like, when you start to feel like you can't do it, that's when you're near. And I've had trying to like play that in my head of I must be near. So yeah, it's ridiculous, isn't it? I've never known anything like it.
Yeah, and I remember when I did it, I did positive hypnotherapy, a course beforehand, which was to help with the breathing and everything, to try and control my breathing, which for me, being induced, and I don't have any frame of reference other than being induced, it's a very sharp rise in terms of the surges that you experience. And so it was completely you know, super helpful for me personally, because I don't think I would have been able to have tolerated it for as long as I did before I ended up reaching for gas and air and then having an epidural, without having had the training beforehand to help me through that birthing process.
That's interesting. There's quite a few women I knew that used that, and some of them said it was actually really helpful. I think any breath work you can do.
Oh yeah,
it's just and sometimes it goes straight out the window because you're like, I can't think of anything else. But if you have, like you said, if you got that in the background, then that can help a little bit, can't it?
Yeah, it can, certainly. And so let's dive into the experience that you had post birth. And the real sort of topic of discussion for today is the experiences that you had following giving birth, and how that changed your trajectory.
Gosh, yeah. Okay, so after birth, I feel it was quite surreal. Naturally, you know, you're going home. I stayed in hospital overnight on my own with him. You're dealing with all that. The first couple of days after, you know, apart from being absolutely physically and you know, battered with being tired and everything, it was all right. You know, even my you know, the 5-day blues where you have that slump of hormones after pregnancy, even that was quite mild for me. And I kind of had a day where it was a little bit emotional, but then off I went and everything was fine again. And I think I still struggled with having a baby and the impact on my work, and then navigating that. I was still adjusting to that identity shift. And I remember crying like a few times when people asked me about my work and everything like that, because I was like, I miss it so much. And I felt really awful that I couldn't, you know, I was feeling that way, that I was missing my work when I had this like beautiful boy in front of me.
Yeah.
And then that obviously didn't help, because obviously I had that guilt about wanting to work, but also being a mum, all that stuff come in.
But it's tied into your identity. I think it's really important to acknowledge that, you know, what we do, what gives us passion and makes us feel purposeful in life, is very much part of our identity. And this is kind of like this spiritual well-being part of us. And when we go through a tectonic shift in the core of our identity, when we're going from you know, one identity that we're super passionate and we find super purposeful every day, and you literally have had to turn the tap off and switch identity, it can be really, really hard.
Yeah.
And I don't think we give ourselves enough credence to the fact of how hard it can be for women and parents just in general.
Yeah, it's ridiculous, isn't it? Like, I think, like you're talking about the training of, like, you know, parents don't get any like that support about how to be in themselves, and that practical kind of step-by-step kind of stuff. You know, even just help in how to work with the shifting identity, like that itself would be incredibly valuable. Like, it's huge. And I remember, like, and with the difficulty with your own business, like, you know, like, you can't just step away. I think, you know, with maternity leave, when you're employed, even that shift of identity is huge. And like underplaying that at all is the difficulty I found is that I wasn't able just to turn off my emails. I wasn't able, you know, I think I gave birth on the Sunday, but then I had to send some emails because the client was waiting for some dates, and I was sending emails on Tuesday, but I couldn't sit down at my desk because of my stitches, because I had a episiotomy thingy, I can never say it, episiotomy, and then I was on my knees by my desk sending emails, like in between, like every time he would be closing his eyes, I'd be trying to find like time. And so you don't have the time. I didn't have to give myself the time to shift properly either. But yeah, it was really difficult. And then the problems that I suppose arose for me were all related, like we said, around breastfeeding. So again, a massive myth that is out there, that breastfeeding is natural and blah, 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 blah. And you expect it to be a lot easier than it is. But if you think about it, you've never done it before, so you have to learn. But the baby doesn't know either. And that's
exactly.
Like, they don't tell you really that in that much detail, that the baby has to learn how to feed.
Yeah.
And obviously there's multiple different reasons why sometimes they can't latch. You know, tongue ties aren't always identified. There's so much.
That was a common one for some of the girls in my NCT group, where that was missed.
Yeah, massively. And, you know, in the NCT group I had, it spent the whole day talking about breastfeeding, but not once was post-weaning depression mentioned. Not like, you know, that all this side of things wasn't discussed. And I remember I was breastfed for quite a few weeks, and found it difficult to produce as much milk as I needed to. He was feeding a lot, like he's a big boy. And I remember then trying to add in one formula feed to try and bolster up his feeding, because I just couldn't keep up. And then naturally then, because I wasn't pumping as much, my flow just slowed down,
reduced.
and it was just became that I needed to feed in more formula because my flow was even like, and so it came this kind of full circle, and I was in this kind of cycle, which I know a lot of mothers are, of like feeding, pumping, feeding, pumping, and you do feel like you're milking cow. Like you're like, you just lose your identity as a woman, as a person.
Yeah, I can completely relate to that, because although I was able to breastfeed, but this feeling of or the pumping piece is incredibly difficult, because you literally feel like a cow, don't you? Like you're at a milking parlour. And I had to do so when COVID happened. I was supporting COVID from a military perspective, and my husband had to look after my daughter, but I was still breastfeeding, so I'd have to pump to feed her, and she'd have to take a bottle of breast milk, which she hated doing. So it was super stressful for him, but I still had to keep pumping, otherwise my milk supply would run out. So it's an unpleasant experience in every way.
And it hurts sometimes. Like breastfeeding, like it's not like, it's not smooth going, is it? Like, my baby, Joel, he is the strongest suck known to man. Like, trying to get a dummy out of his mouth, you have to put your fingers around the back of the dummy and pull it out, because he holds onto it so tightly. It's impossible. And so, like, it's alongside of that whole pumping, like you said, going in that cycle constantly, it's really, really painful. Like one time I remember I was feeding Joel, my husband was coming through the door, and he came in and I couldn't even speak. I was literally like, while he was feeding, because it was so painful. I couldn't talk, I couldn't breathe properly. It was really, it wasn't enjoyable.
Yeah.
But then you get all that pressure, because not only do you have that pressure around everything you do during the pregnancy impacts the baby. Everything that you do, you're solely responsible for bringing a healthy life into the world. And that weight is really hard. And so then you kind of almost, like, I remember saying to my friends, I'm looking forward to him not just giving birth, just so he's not my sole responsibility anymore. That was really hard to carry, that weight of everything I eat, everything I do I sleep enough, everything is impacting him. And then you get, obviously he's born, and then you've got that weight that continues, which I didn't kind of expect as much, around, are you breastfeeding him enough? Is the quality of your milk good enough? Does it have enough layer of fat on top? Like, are you eating well? Because that's going through to the breast milk. Like, it just continues. And so you carry this massive weight with you, and it's that, obviously then that stress impacts your milk as well. So there's so much in there. Anyway, so like my milk supply started slowing down a lot. Ended up, I think, around week 7 or 8, shifting to fully formula fed. But because of my milk slowing down so quickly, I stopped breastfeeding in the space of a week.
Wow.
And when you look at any of the advice, like you have to drop feed slowly, because you have to wean. And the reason being is that, again, like, it's not massively explained, but the reason being is that when you're breastfeeding, like, there's multiple hormones, isn't there? So you've got prolactin, which keeps you calm, keeps you like really, really, really helpful for your mental health. Then you've got estrogen levels. There's quite nice, good level, aren't they? Quite high. And then you've got oxytocin, which helps you bond and connect, and it also helps you reduce stress, and it helps you boost your immune system. Like, oxytocin has a lot to play in your life. And so then that all just like
turned off.
Yeah. You suddenly just go whoosh. And so suddenly
someone turned your tap off.
Yeah, exactly. Someone turned my tap off and my pipe burst. Like, it just, and I was fine for a couple of days, and then I just you hear people talk about this with depression so much, that cloud, that weight.
Yeah.
I really felt like I was just smothered in this darkness. And I've had low mood before. I've had experiences of, I've had suicidal thoughts. I've had all that experience before. But even with my prior experience, I never felt anything so out of my control.
Yeah.
And it was, my husband would come and take the baby in the morning, so I'd go back to sleep, and I would just lie on my bed and just wail. I would just cry uncontrollably. I couldn't, I would sit, I'd go upstairs, I'd pop upstairs to grab something and then just sit on the floor and cry. I just felt horrendous, to the point that, when previously, so when I was younger, I used to have thoughts of suicide. And I remember when I gave birth to Joel, saying to my husband, now I have him, I could never ever imagine doing anything and taking my own life. I could never do that to him now. I love him so fiercely that I just couldn't. And I said it as a kind of thing to him of, you can feel confident and safe now that I'll never do that. And it was a really big moment for me. That never happened to me before, and suddenly it was never going to be an option again. And it was huge. And then I remember sitting there once this post-weaning depression hit, because I didn't know what it was. I was talking to my friends around it, and my sister's been like the rock throughout, and she was like, maybe you've got postnatal depression, you need to talk to someone. And I remember sitting there and thinking, well, I can't take my own life anymore, so what am I going to do? It was almost like I was stuck in this, well, I can't leave, but this, and I was literally thinking, well, if I had a heart attack, then that wouldn't be my fault. And so I'll just drink a little bit of coffee. And and that's not I'm in such a good emotional, mental state now. That's not where I exist anymore. And I remember thinking, oh God, I just kept coming back. And I couldn't get myself out of it. And I've got
did your attachment to your child change?
Yeah. He would, when I first had him, if he cried, I would feel literally EBGBs in my body. If I wasn't with him, I'd be like, oh, I can't do it. I'd be bouncing around. I couldn't stop moving. And to the point that I'd go, my husband was holding him, I'd be like this, give him to me. And I'd start reaching for him. And during this time, he would cry, and I'd I just stay on the toilet a bit longer and leave him with my husband. It was not having the same emotional effect on me at all. And it wasn't.
So your oxytocin would have absolutely depleted, so you didn't have that attachment.
No.
Draw from a hormonal perspective.
Yeah.
So it's completely understandable.
Yeah, it's scary, because you don't ever think. I had such a initial straight away without it. I used to cry when I was pregnant about how much I loved him already. And from the day dot, I was just like, you are me, you are part of me. I had such a strong connection, even though instinctively I knew I would protect him to the end. He was mine, in the sense of I would protect him forever and always. I had that awareness that he was mine, and I loved him and I would protect him. I didn't have that emotional, in the moment connection, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And how did it make you feel, from a parental perspective? What would you be willing to dive into your emotions? Because I know this could be a bit painful, just as a warning before we do.
Yeah, what do you mean in terms of how that make you?
So as a parent, obviously you stopped breastfeeding. What did you feel not enough? Did it, we talked about self-worth at the beginning. Did it really impact your self-worth as a new mum?
Yeah.
How did it change you from, because obviously you're going through an emotional shift when your hormones get the tap gets turned off as you stop breastfeeding. What were the sort of core emotions that were running through you at the time when that tap was turned off?
A lot of shame and a lot of guilt around that. And I think, there was within my NCT group, the mother's still breastfeeding. So again, that comparison was in there, and they were the most supportive humans ever. I've met some incredible girls through that. So it was all internal. It was nothing coming from an external point. And my husband had no expectations about breastfeeding. He just wanted me to be happy. My sister saying that all my family members were like, everyone had my back around it. is it was all internal. It was, you know, me going, I'm not giving him the right start. You know, the first time I gave him his first bottle of formula, I felt like I was poisoning him. And even though this formula is the most incredible formula, like I picked the best one, I picked organic, I picked, you know, like I went like, I researched so much to find the one that was most helpful, but still it wasn't my breast milk. And I was still letting him down, and you know, in my head, and it was so much like, you know, partly from the what they tell you about breast is best and rah, 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 and that you have to, but also a lot of the stuff, whether that's internalized from that or not. But yeah, it felt awful, and every time like the health visitor would come around, and they would ask me if I spoke about it, I feel guilt, because not only was I not breastfeeding him, but then I also, you know, was missing my work, and like I'm like, what kind of mother am I? And it was just, yeah, it was really, really hard. And I probably could still, like, up until recently, if people spoke about breastfeeding, I could probably still get quite teared up about it. But he's like growing so well, like he's so healthy, so strong. And so
I mean, I just want to point out to you on this is, you know, sometimes breast isn't best.
Yeah.
Because your child would not have survived if you just focused on breast.
Exactly.
You know, because it wasn't best for him. And the fact that you know, you took the step to feed him formula, which was essential for his growth and longevity, is great. You know, because I mean, we talk about breast is best, but if we're super stressed, breast isn't best. You know, it's okay to give a child formula. It's totally okay, because you know, your body is telling you that breast isn't best and go get formula, and that is totally okay. And I don't think we necessarily give ourselves permission, because your child needs to survive. So you'll do whatever is appropriate to ensure your child's survival, and it's okay if it's different to, you know, to Ruth or to anybody down the road, because everybody's journey is different.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you, Ruth. That means a lot. And it's you know, so many women need to hear that, don't they? And you know, you're so right. And that's the thing, you know, if you're not eating well, if you're stressed, you got all those stress hormones, you know, there's so many reasons why that, you know, they might not be getting the support they need for the milk. And it's it doesn't come down to that. And you know, it took me a long time to come to peace with that. And you know, even when I hear there's still a bit of like pang inside of me sometimes when I hear women were able to breastfeed so long. But I tried so many different ways. Like I tried nipple protector things.
Oh yeah.
Which are awful. Try and find those in the dark in your bed when they come off is impossible. I tried going to a breastfeeding clinic. I tried like so many different ways that it just, you know, like I said, it wasn't right for us.
Exactly. You know, and you know, people try to get pregnant in the natural way, and it isn't the right way for them, and they have to find alternative ways, and that is okay. You know, some of us may be runners, other people may, you know, may be good at swimming. We're all different, and we just have to find the right way that suits us and suits our family. And that's what you did. So great.
He's doing well, and actually after it probably took me maybe about 4 to 5 weeks to get through what that experience, and that's relatively very short.
That's really short. So how did you get through it? What were the key steps that helped you get out of that cloud and out of the darkness and see the light at the end of the tunnel again?
Good question. So interestingly, so obviously, you know, I've got all this knowledge and experience around postnatal depression, and that's helped. I wasn't aware of, I was aware from my training that if you stop breastfeeding too quickly, and you can like trigger psychosis, you can trigger mental health crisis situations. But in my head, I felt that it was a quick thing. So I thought, well, like a quick dead stop or a weekend stop. In my head, I was like, well, sure, well, is a weekend long enough then? And I thought, okay, well, there's nothing I can do about it. But I thought, wait, that'd be long enough. And I didn't think of like the depression side of things. I thought more of a kind of high crisis situation in terms of psychosis. Like, so my kind of frame of reference around it was just not there. And I remember I was sitting in bed watching Working Mums, if you've ever seen it. Really great TV show. And I remember them saying, and they were sitting around in a support group, and they were like, let's talk about post-weaning depression. And I was like, and I started literally counting back and doing the calculations in my head, and I was like, that's it. It was my breastfeeding that did it. It was stopping breastfeeding that's caused this. Because obviously I was fine, but then I wasn't. And so I started researching loads around it. There's very, very little information. And so post-weaning depression, for those who haven't heard it before, is literally because your breastfeeding stops, your hormones plummet, like we talked about, which triggers this depression, which is a form of postnatal depression, but it's a kind of category. And so, you know, I started researching around it. What I found more often than not was loads of blogs of women who didn't have enough information out there, and so they started to record their own journey to help other women. And when I looked in the comments of these blogs, I found so many women that were saying, yes, I've been dealing with this for years. And all these experiences were like years long. And I was like, oh my God, this is it. Like, this is, you know, I'm going to be experiencing this for years. And and since giving birth, I had reduced my meditation because I hadn't a time to go to the toilet, never mind meditate with the baby. I had, you know, all my well-being practices I would usually do to keep myself well dropped off the face of the earth,
which would have contributed potentially to the plummet that you experienced, because you weren't doing the top up that you were used to doing.
And it is, you don't realize how much of an impact all those well-being practices have until you do them. And so I started going, right, okay, I like made one of my plans in my head, and I thought, right, I'm on it. And I started meditating again. And I remember the first time I meditated, I literally felt like I was surrounded in black. And I felt this like real big weight, and I was just like, I'm just going to sit with it. I'm going to carry on through. And even though that doesn't work for everyone, so like, you know, sometimes you know, sitting with the uncomfortable feelings is not the right way. I sat with it, and it literally, by the end of the meditation, I felt like massively that had shifted, and not the whole cloud, but how I felt in that moment. And then so I started meditating. I started going back to the gym, which has always been a massive coping skill for me. I was obviously talking to my sister. I had a really close friend who I met through NCT, Eliane, and she was such like a support rock for me that I was just talking to her all the time. And she's a trained mental health first aider as well, so she had all the skills. She was really, really good for me. And I just started eating better. I know for me, dairy and sugar have a massive negative impact on my mental health. And so I started reducing those. So I started doing all these things that I would naturally do before and bringing them back. And honestly, what I remember standing by the sink, washing some of his bottles, and thinking, I think this cloud's starting to shift. And I literally could feel it leaving me. And it, you know, it took me a good couple of weeks to really like embed these practices again. And I remember looking at Joel, and I'd started doing loads of like skin on skin again to try and boost that oxytocin level. I'd started watching loads of comedy shows to try and, again, laughter to boost the oxytocin. I started doing loads of little things to boost my oxytocin other than breastfeeding, which I think really, really helped. And I remember looking at him on the change table and going, you're mine. And that was such a big moment when I suddenly realised I'd connected with him again. And, it was like, luckily as well, like, which, you know, many people don't have. My husband was so like he was a rock throughout, and he was gently tiptoeing around me going, do you think you need to speak to someone? You know, like he was like really good. He was like there. He was able to notice signs, and he was really supportive. And luckily working from home as well, so he could, you know, if I needed to go for a quick nap or a poo or a shower, he could take Joel off me. Whereas a lot of mothers don't have that when they're all
Yeah.
on their own all day. So I think the circumstances really helped in my
Yeah.
situation as well.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I just want to go through what you mentioned, because I think it's really important for the audience listening, particularly if there are mums who are struggling with post-weaning depression, is that you mentioned initially, as you know, we go back to self-care, don't we, which we really seem to put on hold when we give birth, but it's so important in terms of helping ourselves to help our children and have that reconnection. And you mentioned starting meditating again, which is, you know, can be so helpful for people, and it's been shown on so many studies to facilitate your mental health and well-being, to take that time to do the meditation. You mentioned going back to the gym, which is really important in terms of boosting our neurotransmitters, BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which helps us build the connections in our brain and helps us build new brain cells, and also boosts serotonin, and it will have effect on oxytocin and dopamine, which is motivational neurotransmitter. So that was super brilliant. You talk to your sister and to friends. Really, really important for people, if they feel they're able to, is to talk about how they're feeling, and to not bury those feelings inside of us, because the body will keep score, which is in essence what was happening initially, but to let them out. And you know, we have to think of we're in an ocean of emotion, and we have to ride the waves of emotion. And it's important that we acknowledge that and don't try and pretend those waves aren't there, but to let them out and really ride them into shore. Eating better. So you mentioned dairy and sugar. So sugar can be is pro-inflammatory for our brain and also for our gut. So when we eat high volumes of sugar, it actually causes us inflammation in our brain, which can contribute to the brain fog, and it could have contributed to the brain fog you're experiencing. And also dairy. So there's two protagonists in terms of our brain function, which is dairy and gluten. And when dairy goes into our stomach, it creates a casomorphin, and that goes goes across the blood-brain barrier, and it's like morphine. So it has the same effect as morphine in the brains of some people. It can be really obvious for some people. And when we go through pregnancy, our brains change as females. So where we started at the beginning of pregnancy, our brains are so different at the end. So what we may be tolerant to at the beginning may be very different when we become actual mums. So that could have contributed to the brain fog and the darkness that you were experiencing, because you were cutting off the transmission that you had in your brain as a consequence of that. And then you mentioned starting with skin on skin to reinvigorate the oxytocin that you were so missing and craving from the experience. Watching comedy shows, as you mentioned, super helpful to boost your serotonin and your oxytocin, and that really helped you connect with him again. So the reason why I wanted to go through that is because we think often that talking in its own right is going to fix the problem, but actually you have to look at lots of different ways. You know, and it's a step-by-step process in terms of changes that you may need to make to yourself and your whole, you know, from a self-care perspective, and they all stack, they all add up. So don't give up and keep going. If you're struggling, you know, as you were, Rebecca, it's important that we look at all options that are open to us and within our control, rather than, you know, which in some cases we can feel we're a victim of it, when actually we've got a huge amount of control over it. And so I'm really pleased that you were able to take back control in a way that worked for you. I'm conscious we're coming to the end of the show. What one piece of advice would you give to anybody who is struggling with what they may think is post-weaning depression?
Yeah. I would say massively, it's really what is really powerful, like you said, that holistic side of things. We have our well-being is a lot more under our control than we often give ourselves credit for. And so it's having a look at that holistic side of things, of what can I do for my physical health, what can I do for my relaxation, what can I do for my nutrition, looking at all the sides of those things, but not forgetting, especially with post-weaning depression, oxytocin is something that we can boost. And often we don't think about that. And so there's so many different ways that we can boost our oxytocin, whether it's stroking a pet, having a massage, giving someone a cuddle, making
havening is the thing that I do, which is a oxytocin boost. Massaging your child.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you're staring at someone into their eyes. Like, there's this activity that you can do where you stare at your partner or someone you care about for 5 minutes in their eyes without saying anything. And as creepy as it sounds, it can be really powerful to create connection and things like that. So, making eye contact with your child, making eye contact with your partner, your friends, really holding that, especially in this online world now, where a lot of time we're not looking at our cameras. And so, making sure that we're containing that, we're giving ourselves hugs as well, which I know sounds weird, but there's nothing better than a self hug sometimes that we need. And it's just remembering that there's a lot of things, feel good music, anything we can do to boost our serotonin, boost our oxytocin, will help to replace that plunge that a lot of the time happens because you've stopped breastfeeding. And then naturally then you can start building on that. Like you said, all these good well-being practices and habits stack, and so the more you can really look at it from a holistic point of view, then the better you will be, and the quicker you'll recover.
Oh, thank you so much, Rebecca, for sharing your story and that story of hope, because it is truly a story of hope that, there is light at the end of the tunnel. And you, depending on your frame of reference, of the power to find your way out. And if you can't find your way out yourself, then please do reach out to someone that can guide you, like Rebecca has, and show you the way. And with that in mind, Rebecca, how can people get hold of you?
Yeah, so anyone can reach me via my LinkedIn. So I'm Rebecca Reed, used to be Rebecca Cheetham, Rebecca Reed on LinkedIn. You can reach me on my website. It's www.siendo.co.uk. Siendo is Spanish for being, so it's spelled Siendo. And you can also email me as well if you want to just reach out, if you've got any experiences and you want signposting towards support, anything like that, or just want to share your experiences, reach out to me on email, hello@siendo.co.uk as well.
Oh, well, Rebecca, I just want to thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing your story. It's been such a enlightening conversation, and I'm so pleased you were able to share it and give hope to others. So thank you. And everybody, remember, this show is all about brain health, unchaining your pain. You are not stuck with the brain you have. You have the power to make it better. And Rebecca has been here to show you how.
Thanks, Ruth. It's been a pleasure.
You're welcome.